So somehow, even though this morning, at who knows what time, we crossed the line from summer to fall, we have spring showers this morning. I don't know how that kind of worked out. So we are the few, we are the proud. At the moment, we are the dry. And so what I'd like to do for about 45 minutes this morning, leaving 10 or 15 minutes for conversation, is walk you through what I think is the trial of the centuries. How often have you heard, even early, 2002, there must have been a case and someone said, this is the trial of the century. And of course the historian in me says, can we wait another 98 years to figure that out? But of all the trials, of all the centuries, of all the millennia, something sticks out about the trial of Socrates. And the trial of Socrates is far more about Socrates, because Socrates knows when he walks into that courtroom, which wasn't a courtroom, it was open air, that he's a dead man. He knows he's going to be convicted, guilty. He also knows that he will be given the death penalty. So what does he do? At the age of 70 or 72, depending on the sources, he decides that he's going to turn the tables. He's going to put Athens on trial. So the only way to understand the trial of Socrates is to understand Athens, and indeed ancient Greek civilization. And I should say, as I tell my students, that there was no such thing as the Greeks. I'm going to be using it as a shorthand, but there were hundreds of city-states. The two big ones that you know, of course, are Sparta and Athens. Athens by far the largest with 100,000 people. Sparta next in line with 30, and the others 8, 10,000, the others 2 or 3,000, most of them 2 or 3,000. And so I will shorthand say the Greeks, knowing that if you time traveled any of these people, they would say, like me from Freehold, New Jersey, oh no, I'm from Central Jersey. And that is a place. Right? So I'm going to use a little bit of a shorthand. And of course, being this event, it's shrouded in mystery. It's shrouded in myth. And perhaps the most famous moment from this trial was painted 2,100 years later. A painting that you've seen that gets absolutely everything wrong. Nevertheless, as I tell my students, we can learn a lot from mistakes. We can learn a lot from things that are not right. The first thing that my students always say is, wow, look at that guy. 72, he's ripped. He's buff. I'm 58, I got no chance there. Right? Even the guy giving the hemlock has got calves all day long. The painting was done by Jacques-Louis David just around the time of the French Revolution. Of course, we know that the French Revolution occurs in 1789, but there was a lot of tumult in the 1780s and also a period of time known as neoclassicism, new classicism. This is why if you go to Washington, D.C., essentially what you're looking at are Greco-Roman temples, because that was what the architecture was. If you were Alexander Hamilton or Thomas Jefferson or John Adams, and you wanted to get into Harvard or the College of William and Mary or the College of New Jersey, later known as Princeton, at the age of about 15, you had to know Greek, you had to know Latin, and the way to learn those languages is to study the philosophy and the mythology of those periods. And so in the 18th century, there was a fascination with this period of time because Pompeii had been dug up and discovered in the middle of the 1700s. It was very au courant. And so Jacques-Louis David, looking for metaphors for overthrowing autocracy, overthrowing tyranny, for standing up and calling out wrong, Socrates may be the first whistleblower. He chooses, among other scenes, the Oath of the Horatia you've seen as well, this scene to represent what is going on, what had occurred in the American Revolution, what is occurring in the tumult that will become the French Revolution. So let's say what's wrong about this painting. The first is Socrates was a bald, fat, ugly man with bulging eyes and a huge nose with hairs coming out of him, who absolutely went against what we call the Greek ideal. The Greek ideal is beautiful bodies, right? And he, being Socrates, turned it around. He would say, well, if I have a big stomach, it is because I enjoy the fruits of the earth. If I have bulging eyes, it is because I can see further than you. I can smell the senses more, and so I am more Athenian than any of you who are giving up good food and who are giving up lovely leisure. The second thing is wrong is that the person who's sitting at the end is Plato. Plato is Socrates' prize student. The line is Socrates taught Plato. Plato taught Aristotle. Aristotle was the tutor of Alexander the Great. We learn all we know about Socrates through the writings of Plato. We have no writings of Socrates. What we have are Plato's writings. Early on in his career, it's clear that he's representing what he remembers Socrates. Later on in his career, he departs from Socrates a little bit. He gets his own thinking. So we're pretty sure that what Plato says Socrates said more or less. Now, if Socrates looks great at 72, Plato looks horrible at 29. And that's Plato. In the background, actually true, Socrates' wife and children were allowed to come in to say goodbye. Even though this was a man who rejected the body, one of his last acts is to take a bath because he wants to, as he says, save the women the trouble from washing me. And his other friends, of course, they just can't take this. They're looking away. He's drinking hemlock, a particularly horrible way to die. When you drink hemlock, what it essentially does is hardens your arteries. So you drink hemlock, a very thick black liquid, and then you are instructed to walk around so that it courses through your body. And as your legs get heavy, you lay down and you lose the power of your legs and your arms until your heart stops. By some accounts, this can take 10 minutes or it can take an hour. Remember hemlock. And I also want you to look at those chains at the bottom. See that? Those chains are going to be a metaphor for Socrates letting go of the body so that his soul may be free. We're going to come back to this image at the end and visit it again. So, just a reminder that source material is scarce. Just to give you an example, we believe that we have 20 to 25% of the writing of the ancient Greeks and the Romans. Why do we know what they wrote that we lost? Because we have library lists. So God forbid the Library of Congress would burn down, but if we had the card catalog, we would know there were books with these titles without having the books. By the way, most of those do not exist from this period of time. They exist in manuscripts that were written down by men and women in European monasteries in the early medieval period. Those nameless men and women who passed along these great traditions. And so when we look at Plato, we just have to accept the fact that he was the prize student and he's recording what he says was said. We can't get any better than that, even if we wanted to try. But to understand what Socrates is doing in the trial, to understand what he says particularly about being enlightened, and particularly about being a good citizen. Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle believe that we have an educational system to make good citizens, to build virtue in people. And by the way, they are doing this outside of a religious context. Yes, they are polytheists. Yes, they have a huge system of gods with, Zeus and all of these other folks. Some people want to say that Socrates was a proto-Christian or a proto-monotheist, but by and large, we must take what we think about religion out of this conversation. They believed virtue and vice could be taught, and that virtue and vice should be taught in order to have good citizens, and that this could be done outside of what we would call a religious context. And so the key thing that Plato learns from Socrates is this, that we are all essentially captive. These are two images of the same thing. I'm going to be just focusing on the left one here for a moment, but you see prisoners here and prisoners there, and a road out to the sunlight and a fire. I'm just going to spend my time here for a minute. We are prisoners trapped. Remember the chain at the feet of Socrates? Representing being freed. We only see partly truth, justice, beauty, but also Plato believes that somewhere out there in the world of forms or ideas or ideals, and again, this is all Socrates thinking going through Plato, that somewhere out there is true justice, true beauty. And the example that I use with my students is that somewhere out there, there is your favorite food from your culture. And then there are pale imitations. So for me, I tell my students, there's my grandmother's lasagna, the ideal, and then there's Olive Garden. With all due respect to Olive Garden. Maybe they won't be a sponsor. Or there's Mexican food, and then there's Taco Bell. You see that? And because we are human beings, in this life, entrapped by our own lusts, our own desires, our own imperfections, we can only see representations of the truth. So now here's a fire, right? This is early PowerPoint. What if I showed a cutout of a dog, that's not a dog, but I'm making it a dog, and I taught my daughter when she was 1 that a dog goes moo. And then she goes to a zoo, and she walks up to a dog, and she yells moo, and people want to arrest me as a bad parent. What if we are misinformed? Dare I use the word disinformation? What if some of these prisoners were able to escape and run out into the light and be enlightened, where they understand that they only partially saw a tree, but here they see what is truly a tree? What might happen? Well, this person might go running back and say, guys, dudes, dudettes, it's a lie. What you're being told is not true. And some of those people inside will say, oh, no, this is safe, this is comfortable, this is dry. You're trying to trick me. It's dangerous out there. And so Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle wonder whether everyone can in fact be educated. Will some stay there because they want to? Will some only be able to get that far? Will some only be able to get that far? And what of the people who get out and are enlightened? Well, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle will say those people should lead society. They should be the teachers. They should be the guardians. They should be the philosopher king. And if they go back and are persecuted for revealing the truth, then they die a good death. And Plato learns that from the Trial of Socrates. Do you see that? In fact, Plato will say you have a duty. You don't have a choice. If you go out and are enlightened, you can't keep walking away. You have to go back and drag these people out, even if there is a cost. And certainly the cost was the life of Socrates.